So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
Great news ahead of us. Abortion numbers are dropping where restrictions have been implemented. At the same time, we're seeing challenges ahead as we may see the overturning of Roe versus Wade coming up in June by the Supreme Court as they continue to ponder and work through the arguments surrounding the Mississippi abortion case. We'll discuss abortion in just a moment. Coming up in just a little bit will be Peter Atkinson. He's the director of the Merry Beggars, which has been newly acquired by Relevant Radio, producing family-friendly entertainment here at Relevant Radio. So we'll discuss the Merry Beggars, Charles Dickens, and we'll also dive into the topic of what it's like to be involved in the media industry as a person of faith. We'll also talk about peace, that second week of Advent. That's a theme for our second Advent candle. And we'll connect that to the Jesse tree, which is a common practice that many people implement in their home to bring a part of their Christmas decorations and their faith together. I'll explain what that is and some fun ways to do that with style. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. I'm Timmerie, and it's great to be with you. If you have a question during the show, you can always reach out, 1-888-914-9149, or you can ask your question live on Instagram. Follow me at Timmerie, that's Timmerie. Okay, fantastic news. You may recall with so many of the things surrounding pro-life laws and the Supreme Court case, some people have forgotten to talk about Texas and what's been happening in Texas. Well, Texas, as we recall, on September 1st, went into effect their heartbeat law, which we've seen other heartbeat laws passed in various states here in the nation, anything from Iowa to Ohio, you name it. But this one's been a little different because normally it's the state that enforces a law. And what happens when Planned Parenthood and the greater abortion industry then goes to court and basically makes it so that although the law's on the books, the court has decided that it's not going to be basically enforced, because normally it would be the state, the government that enforces it. But this law in Texas is different because it's you and I who enforce it. We can sue someone who tries to aid and abet an abortion or perform an abortion, not the mom herself who's seeking the abortion, because we recognize many women are under duress. So it's basically suing those people who would be providing or aiding and supporting an abortion. Well, what's happened since then? Since the law went into effect in Texas, this is really, really good news. Here's the reality. Where abortion restrictions stand, lives are saved. There's a lot of conversation about incrementalism and whether or not you vote for, let's say, a piece of legislation or support a legislation that doesn't 100% outlaw abortion. Well, incrementalism is important. We have to do the most good we can in these instances. In this case, the law that bans an abortion after a baby's heartbeat is detected is an example of that. In Texas, a baby, we can detect that heartbeat right around 6 weeks, even though the baby's heart starts beating by 16 weeks in the latest studies from Oxford. Now, here's what's happened in Texas since this abortion restriction after a baby's heartbeat is detected. The University of Texas at Austin has reported a massive drop in abortions in Texas. In fact, if you were to compare the numbers between 2020 and 2021, abortions have halved in the state of Texas. This is an incredible success. Now, some people may argue, well, people can travel to a different state to obtain an abortion, or they could have an abortion earlier, and this is pushing some women to have that abortion earlier to make their decision sooner. Sure, that can be the case, but here's the good news. The reality is that while yes, it is reducing numbers in a massive way, what happens is when access to abortion decreases, more women choose to have their babies. Yes, they can travel across state lines or have an abortion sooner, but the reality is adjust the numbers for 1 month, the month of September alone. If you were to average the numbers out and compare it to the year before, with half of the abortions being performed, that's 2,149 babies' lives who were saved. That's a huge success. 2,149 babies' lives saved. Do we hear that? Do we recognize that number? Because that is a huge success. Even if this law only saved one baby's life, it would be worth it. This is making history. It's the first time that any state has actually enforced a heartbeat law because of how the law is written. It's individuals who would be responsible for enforcing it, not the government in this case. That's why we're in all new waters with regard to this abortion law. And even the Supreme Court itself has, on 2 instances, insisted that this law continue to stand in place when Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry has appealed. Even the President Biden administration has appealed for the Supreme Court to put a hold on the law. They haven't. Here's one thing that an abortionist Allison Gilbert from Southwestern Women's Surgery Center in Dallas reported. Surgery center. She said there's been a 75% drop in abortions at her clinic, and she expects that to go all the way up to a 90% drop. We are seeing countless lives being saved. We may not ever know their name or the name of their mothers or fathers. We may never know their story. We may not even ever be able to look at their face and say, wow, that life has been able to continue to be lived out. It hasn't been snuffed out. It hasn't been ended. A woman that doesn't carry the heartbreak of an abortion because of this law and it being upheld. We may never see those faces or hear their stories, but it's still a win. It's still a success. We may only hear numbers and that's all, but we have to know that means more families who are intact, more women who aren't mourning lost motherhood, more women who aren't forced into decision that they will ultimately lead to ending their child's life. Here's the truth, and this is something that we need to tell more people. A poll from the University of Houston and Texas Southern University shows that when polling Texans, 55% of Texans support this law banning abortion after a baby's heartbeat is detected. 2 things stand out to me about this. One, that's not what you hear from mainstream media. You would believe that the vast majority of people are pro-abortion. That's not the case nationwide. And this poll in Texas shows us just a glimpse of the truth here. But I also think it's interesting that not only do 55% of people support this Texas abortion law, which, by the way, 5-6 weeks into pregnancy, still in the first trimester. A lot of people try to claim, well, I don't want abortion the 2nd or 3rd trimester. But I think what's significant about this law and what people are understanding, whoa, they're realizing the baby's heartbeat is detected around 6 weeks. That baby's heart's been beating a long time, but we can see, we can hear, we know it's there. I remember when I was pregnant with my baby girl, and I had to have a lot of ultrasounds in the beginning because they originally thought I had an ectopic tubal pregnancy, and then I had a blood clot next to the baby that at one point they told me they thought was a twin, and I had low progesterone numbers, and so long story short, I had to go in for a lot of early ultrasounds, and very early on, you can't see a whole lot. You see, the yolk sac, you see where the baby is at. But then as the ultrasounds go on, eventually right around that 6-week mark, you can see the movement where the baby's heart is beating. Or maybe you can't see because the baby's tucked so far back at a certain place in the uterus and is so tiny you can't actually see the baby yet because it's tucked back. And ultrasound is maybe having a hard time seeing the image. I think that the heartbeat law in Texas was a testament to the reality, the presence of a child in the womb. And this continues to support the fact that when we connect the person, the individual of the baby, with the reality of abortion, more people than we realize are pro-life. And that is fantastic news. These are lives saved. Again, over 2,000 lives saved just for 1 month in Texas. This is excellent news. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. I want to share with you, though, some challenges ahead. The CDC, just over the last few weeks, has reported on some of the recent abortion trends surrounding chemical abortions. We know from some statistics that we have that the majority of abortions being performed today are actually chemical abortions. You might also almost call them a do-it-yourself or at-home abortion, which, by the way, has been on the rise since COVID, and especially over the last year since the current administration, the Biden administration, has deregulated some of the important health-saving measures and restrictions on the RU486 chemical abortion pill mifepristone. What's happened is they've totally deregulated it. We've talked about that here on the show before. I'm not going to get into that, but the bottom line is over the last 2 years, 2020, 2021, we've seen an increase in chemical abortions because the abortion clinics are referring these out more to have less inpatient operations, and the current administration is pushing for this. Very harmful, very dangerous for women. But here's what's significant. The CDC, and I'm going to get in just a moment to information that you and I need to have so that we can help reach these women before they're at risk of the abortion pill. But here's what happened. The CDC has reported that numbers for 2019, again, pre-COVID, the numbers here in the United States for 2019, they saw a 12% increase in chemical abortions, RU486 abortions. That's a significant jump, not even taking into consideration that 2020 and 2021, we saw a huge push for chemical abortions during COVID, do it at home, as well as a deregulation of the chemical abortion pill. This is very, very disheartening because it shows, yet again, a trend that we've been seeing in the crisis pregnancy center for years. I worked in the crisis pregnancy centers for 5 years, and I also have been on the sidewalks counseling women for many years in front of the abortion clinic. And it's become increasingly more difficult to reach pregnant women who are abortion vulnerable because so often they're doing two things. One, women who are afraid of pregnancy and engaging in a sexually active life, even if on contraception, are taking Plan B multiple times after having their babies. Plan B, which causes an abortion, a very early abortion. But two, a lot of women are being targeted for chemical abortions. And with this deregulation, there's an increase in chemical abortions today. Practically this over-the-counter approach. And so what the challenge is for us is that not all the crisis pregnancy centers, not all the sidewalk counselors, not everyone can reach the girls who are having abortions today. And early abortions too, which, remember, still kills a baby and still steals the motherhood of a woman and causes many psychological, emotional, and physical side effects. So we need to reach them. We need to have the information ready and available, but also be actively talking about early abortions, chemical abortions, and the side effects of the abortion pill so that people know the truth. You see, the physical side effects are very intense. Everything from incompleted abortions from the chemical abortion to failed abortion procedures and then having to go in for a surgical abortion later, which can also lead to infections, fevers, digestive issues, heavy prolonged bleeding, significant bleeding. I've worked with clients and women who have chosen abortion, unfortunately, and I've sat there talking with them and counseling them through the aftermath where they've been passing blood clots the size of baseballs. They've sat in tubs of blood. They've suffered. They've been in pain. And many of whom need medical attention, but because it was a do-it-at-home abortion, a chemical abortion, they suffered alone because they felt like they deserved it because they knew what an abortion was. Even if they don't know in description and detail or see it happen, deep down inside, all women know the truth that abortion ends the life of their child. For whatever reason, they've justified it. And you see, we need to talk about these side effects. Maybe even play that brief clip from the movie Unplanned, telling the story of former abortion clinic worker Abby Johnson, who also had a chemical abortion. It's terrible. It hurts women, and women know this, but not enough women are being told beforehand. Now, the United States hides a lot of the information, data surrounding the RU486 abortions. In fact, some of the limited data we have about chemical abortions' impact is actually coming out of the UK. Out of the UK, we saw 10,000 women who were hospitalized after taking abortion pills in 1 year. But here in the United States, Health and Human Services is not disclosing accurate medical data on abortion because it's political. Because it was proved the point that abortion is bad for women's health, both physically and psychologically. And so this is why we have to tell the truth when no one else is. Our girls, women, and mothers need the truth before it's too late. Sharing resources such as abortion pill reversal, you can actually stop the abortion process once it's started. It's a 2-pill series, and if there's been intervention early enough, that is a life-saving treatment. Abortionpillreversal.com. There are networks of medical doctors across the nation ready to help. We need to tell our kids, tell their friends, tell our friends that if they face an unplanned pregnancy, especially if we know someone who's living a sexually active lifestyle, especially outside of marriage, we need to let them know of resources. We need to let them know that we're here to help them navigate it and not just feel judged, not feel like they screwed up, not feel like they have no options, because we are here. This is what will help us to remedy the chemical abortion culture that we live in today. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. I'll be back in just a minute with exciting news having to do with entertainment available for the whole family. So we talk about the Merry Beggars, and if you're following it, the Charles Dickens A Christmas Story that we've been sharing here at Relevant Radio this Advent. I'll be right back here on Trending. You can ask your question by giving me a call, 1-888-914-9149. Or you can follow me on Instagram and ask your question live now at Timmerie. That's Timmerie. I'll be right back.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. It's great to be with you. Joining me now is Peter Atkinson. Very exciting news. If you've not followed some of what's been happening here at Relevant Radio, we have recently stepped out on an adventurous entertainment front, and we have entertainment for the whole family now available to you from Relevant Radio. And to join us to talk a little bit about that is Peter Atkinson, the director of the Merry Beggars. Welcome to Trending, Peter.
Hi, Timmerie. It's good to be with you.
I'm so excited that you're here joining us with the Relevant Radio family. A lot's been happening over the last few months, and some people are starting to follow the exciting tales of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Story. But let's talk a little bit about what brought you to Relevant Radio and what's available to people this Advent.
Right. So, it's an absolute thrill for me to be part of the Relevant Radio family and to bring the Merry Beggars to the Relevant Radio family. The Relevant Radio brand is taken in the Merry Beggars as sort of the entertainment division, and our first production is this audio advent calendar for families this Christmas season. So we've adapted Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol into 25 different episodes, one for each day of December. We got 25 professional actors from around the Chicago area and several states outside of Illinois, brought them into the studios at Relevant Radio's headquarters, and recorded an adaptation of A Christmas Carol. So if Relevant Radio's audience goes to themerrybeggars.com, or they can find a link to it on Relevant Radio's website, they can listen with their whole family to a new episode of A Christmas Carol every single day of Advent.
This is so exciting. I think especially as there's been a massive trend to audible entertainment. I remember as a kid, my mom would pull up audiobooks for us to listen to, but today's audiobooks are not yesterday's audiobooks. And the same is, I think, being brought to life with these productions via radio again. Can you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah, no, so it's super exciting because I grew up listening to old radio shows. I grew up listening to Suspense, Gunsmoke, Lone Ranger, all of those, and they're amazing entertainment. And it's exciting to be able to produce new and original stories, but with today's technology, so that instead of listening to, a 1930s horse that sounds remarkably like coconuts clapping back and forth, we're able to actually make this audio story sound like an immersive, beautiful, adventurous movie that people are able to listen to. One of the things that I love about the audio medium is that it really allows people's imaginations to enter the world in a way that is similar to reading or hearing a story read out loud. So we've heard from families who are enjoying this with their kids every evening, teachers playing this for their classroom, and all sorts of people listening to it as a way to go deeper into the Advent season.
It's funny you mentioned that because it does allow your imagination to run wild in a certain respect. We've gotten rid of our TV here in our house about a year and a half ago. And the other day I was folding a massive load of I don't know how many loads of laundry. I thought, you know what, I'm going to watch a Christmas movie on my iPad. Haven't watched anything in a while. It's just me at home right now. Baby's sleeping. And as I started to try and pick something up, I went, you know what? I really don't want to watch a movie right now. And the reason for that is it just sounded boring to me in the respect that my imagination couldn't run with it. And so I ended up playing an audiobook instead. And we're seeing a lot of people who are turning to digital audio entertainment today. So I think that this is a really neat offering that allows people to really bring this into their families, bring this to their homes. Let's talk a little bit about A Christmas Carol itself. What's the story behind A Christmas Carol, and why did Charles Dickens write it?
Yeah, so we decided to go with A Christmas Carol as our first production for a few reasons. One is that it's a beautiful way to accompany people towards Christmas. Advent, sometimes it can pass people by, and you can wake up and discover it's Christmas and realize you didn't celebrate Advent that well. So we're hoping that this production can help people experience Advent. But the story behind why Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol is he had a few failed books, and his reputation was not very good. And so he needed to have a quick book to publish to satisfy his creditors. And so he ended up writing A Christmas Carol in only 6 weeks. He would walk through London in the middle of the night, trying to find inspiration. And he eventually found it, and self-published A Christmas Carol. And because of A Christmas Carol, Christmas is now actually the most, the popular holiday that it is today. Before Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, Puritans in America and Europe mostly sort of resisted festivity and good cheer and punch and all the things that, we love celebrating and feasting as Catholics. And Dickens helped give new life to the celebration of Christmas, in Europe first, in England, of course, and then later in America. Before A Christmas Carol, there wasn't really much celebration. Most of the celebration around Christmas had died out in the 14th century when the pandemic of the Black Plague had sort of made communal celebrations not very popular. And so Charles Dickens really did help create Christmas as we know it, sort of culturally. So we're hoping this production helps people experience the beauty of Christmas, experience the beauty of Advent as they approach Christmas, and we're excited to hear sort of some of the audience reactions that it's having that effect so far.
And isn't that the challenge during Advent, to keep our focus on why we are approaching Christmas, why we celebrate Christmas, rather than jumping right ahead to Christmas? So I think that the incredible production that you've put together with the Merry Beggars, A Christmas Carol, now part of Relevant Radio, is a opportunity for families to come together, count down the days, do something digitally together as a family. Where can people find A Christmas Carol if they'd like to start listening?
Yeah, no, that's so they can find it at relevantradio.com or the Relevant Radio app. There you can click through to the Merry Beggars there, or you can go to the merrybeggars.com. And I think what you said is absolutely true. I know for myself, one of the reasons that we produced it the way we did is every episode begins with a little very short meditation on the meaning of Christmas and on how people celebrate Christmas. And the idea behind that was, if families are listening together, we don't want this to just be sort of an escapism or an adventure that doesn't leave you spiritually fed or anything like that. We really wanted to shape the production and the story and the experience so that people feel spiritually nourished and fed by the time they leave each episode.
What's your favorite episode? Something we're looking forward to ahead, or that we've already heard?
One of my favorite episodes actually was the one that released today, because today was the very first time that the audience ever heard Jacob Marley's voice. Before now, we've been living in a very realistic 1843 London. Everyone is human. There are no real spirits, so to speak. So it's exciting to start to release some of the Jacob Marley, who of course is dead, and he comes back as a spirit. To warn Scrooge about his upcoming visits. I love being able to work with the sound designers and create just this beautiful, rich, imaginative story that our audience can be blown away by. So there are lots of, good things to come. There are lots of great voices and experiences and adventures to come, but I'm really excited by the voice of Jacob Marley, by the world that we're creating. And each episode, takes untold number of hours to get it to the level that we feel confident in releasing it. We recorded about 28 hours of audio from the actors during 4 days of recording. And since then, we've spent, unnumbered hours going through the performances and making sure that the voices sound the way we want them to. So to me, just honestly, releasing them to the audience is extremely exciting, but especially releasing the ghost voices and the spirits voices and all of the imagination that's tied up in their performances.
That's Peter Atkinson, the director of the Merry Beggars, the newest member of the Relevant Radio family. You can find the work of the Merry Beggars as well as a Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol at themerrybeggars.com, but also found at Relevant Radio on the Relevant Radio app. I'd like to dive into a little bit of your experience in the entertainment industry. Prior to joining us here at Relevant Radio, what was it like for you being a Catholic in the entertainment industry? And can you share with us a little bit about what you did as well?
Yeah, so I went to Ave Maria University down in Florida. I studied classics there, but I really felt drawn to working in theater and working in the arts. And so I ended up going to Columbia University in New York City, and had a really great time there. I got to star off Broadway in Eugene O'Neill revival at the Sheen Center in Manhattan, which was amazing. But most of the jobs that you get handed as sort of a Christian or a Catholic in the entertainment industry, most of them are either, against your morals, against the faith, or at best, they're not against your morals, but they're essentially meaningless. And so it was extremely frustrating as a Catholic in the entertainment industry because, if you're unlucky, all the projects that you get offered are projects where, the main character rejects their Catholic faith or is supporting lifestyles that are not in alignment with the Catholic worldview, or, has different moral messages that are that you just can't perform as a Catholic.
Right, and not to mention the entertainment industry itself as well, the culture behind the scenes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing is that if you're lucky, you end up doing toothpaste commercials, which is great. I mean, someone has to do them, and my goodness, toothpaste commercials pay well. But that's not sort of why I went into acting and entertainment. And after doing it for 3 years, after getting my MFA at Columbia University, I had some wonderful experiences and just incredible training. But there is sort of a limit where you can't accept most of the jobs that get offered to you. And that can be extremely frustrating as a Catholic and trying to make it in the entertainment industry.
I've had the opportunity over the years, especially working in campus ministry, to work with young aspiring actors and actresses. Right. And I remember the challenge in many ways was going to, how is this individual going to be prepared to face whether it's the theater culture, the Hollywood culture, because it's not easy. Coming from a dance background myself, I've seen it. I've been around it my entire life. I know the challenges from the superficiality and the materialism that we can turn to so much of what we saw in the Me Too movement that's come out surrounding Hollywood. There's so many challenges.
It's really hard. I mean, it's an incredibly hard industry, even if you're not particularly morally principled, right? Like, even if you're the most secular person who wouldn't know a moral principle if it walked in front of them, it's still an incredibly hard industry to break into. And so when you add on top of that the fact that you are a Catholic or a Christian or you have convictions, it can just make it even that much harder. And so I think what most people do is they end up sort of stuffing or rationalizing away their principles or their morals in order to get a job, because it's hard enough to make it in the industry when you're secular. And so when you're Catholic, suddenly every other job is impossible for you to take. And so I think oftentimes, just little by little, Catholics and Christians either find themselves, stuffing down their faith identity a bit more, or their morals a bit more, or they end up sort of just compromising them little by little by little. And what ends up happening is the people who oftentimes are left making the entertainment that our kids are consuming for 10 hours a day are the people who are left after that process, which is not exactly the greatest selection process for people we want to be in charge of the moral formation of our kids.
So, what was it like for you specifically as a Catholic working in the entertainment industry, and what led you to get out of a secular environment?
So part of this, I mean, most of this, all of this is God's grace. So I lucked out incredibly when I went to Columbia University, because I ended up living in a community for Columbia graduate students that were all Catholic. So I was living with 12 other Catholic graduate students. We had a private chapel on the top floor with the Blessed Sacrament in reserve. We had masses said there, so it was sort of, a little bit like living in a monastery while working, at Columbia University and in New York. So that was a huge, just realm of spiritual protection for me while I was in New York City, and that was all God's grace. And then the other thing that sort of helped me keep my faith in the entertainment industry was just, frequenting the sacraments constantly. So I would go to adoration every day. There was a church near the studio where I was training that I would go to adoration and mass every morning before classes. And that sort of helped me keep grounded while I was in the industry. But the thing that really led me out of trying to just make it by normal means was really just my impatience. I didn't want to wait around until someone handed me a project that I could believe in, or handed me a script that I thought, I could be proud of making in 10 years. I just was very impatient around that. And I thought, you know what, I can actually start to make this happen myself. And so that's where the Merry Beggars came from, was a realization that Catholic actors and artists needed an organization to start producing scripts that they could actually do, they could believe in, and that would give glory to God. And it's been beautiful to see how far Providence has taken the Merry Beggars, and how Providence led it to Relevant Radio. And I'm really, really excited about the Christmas Carol production. It's a level of production and a scale of production that we could not have done without Relevant Radio. And I'm even more excited about the things we have planned for the future. So God willing, this is just the beginning.
And I want to come back to something you just said, because it's relevant not just to anyone who's working in the entertainment industry, but anywhere where we cross over with the secular world today, which is the vast majority of the jobs that most of us are in. It's challenging. We are increasingly facing things that would lead to a compromisation of our morals, of our religion. And so kind of that regiment that you just gave for going to adoration regularly, going to daily mass, having a robust prayer life. You mention it as if, living in a monastery almost. And I think of it, for me, that was part of what my formation was so important. I spent summer programs in formation with a religious community, the community of St. John. And it was so important because they were actually shaping people who weren't going to join religious life. You could discern it if you'd like to, but they were shaping people because they said, listen, we are monks, we are religious sisters. We have all of this formation, but we get to be around wholesome people all the time. Well, you're out there in the world. How do you do it without living a contemplative lifestyle? And so what you just shared about being able to survive in the entertainment industry or in a secular environment, I think speaks to what so many of us need to discover, our own sense of a monastery, our own home of contemplation, becoming the domestic church within our homes to allow us to survive in the face of secularism today.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I love the word you use, contemplative. I think that's 100% correct. One of the things that I found was I was in, casting rooms and performance rooms and, stages where most of the people in the room didn't agree with my views, were living lifestyles that I didn't agree with, so on and so forth. As you can imagine, right, in New York in the entertainment industry, no shocker there. But I found that the way that I could exist in that space with peace in my heart was if I had spent time in contemplation in front of the Blessed Sacrament, because I knew that, arguments were not going to convince anyone, arguing things back and forth, arguing about morals in that environment was just not going to change anyone's heart. And so I had to figure out, okay, where is God calling me? Where is God calling me to deepen my relationship with him? And I realized, I was either going to discover a deep relationship with God, or the secular environment was going to, destroy my relationship with God. And so the way that I found to sort of anchor myself in Christ was just, silent prayer in front of Eucharistic adoration, and making sure that I spent, at least 20 minutes a day just trying to let God encounter my heart and trying to let my heart encounter God. And if I was able to make that happen, then there was almost never a moment in the day where I felt like, I had to argue against someone, or I had to, hide my Catholic identity. And there were some beautiful moments over my graduate career where one of my classmates ended up going to Ash Wednesday Mass with me, and he hadn't been to Mass in years. And people reacted rather strongly to my ashes on Ash Wednesday one year, and lots of different things. But just for me, learning how to, persevere in my intimate relationship with Christ, especially in adoration, that was key, because it was only by deepening my relationship with Christ that I would be able to not be persuaded or moved or converted, in a sense, by the secular industry. And the other thing was friendship. I mean, the friendships that I was given in New York City with other Catholics, those were incredible bulwarks. So I would just add to your recipe of the sacraments, adoration, and Mass, I would just add, finding good Catholic friendships that will be there for you in good times and bad. And I was graced very, very fortunately to have many of those friendships in New York City.
Incredible testimony for so many of us to survive in the secular world today, no matter where we work. Let's talk a little bit about what's coming next. The Merry Beggars are currently working and producing for Relevant Radio here the story of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. You can sign up for that now at relevantradio.com or on the Relevant Radio app if that's where you're listening. But what other wholesome family entertainment do you have planned for us in the new year?
Yes, so most of our time, I'm going to admit, most of our time over the next month is going to be spent finishing out A Christmas Carol. We're still working and producing and sound designing and developing these episodes, and it's pretty intensive. So that's going to be our focus through the rest of this month. But for 2022, we have some exciting shows planned. One of them is titled On the Night Train, and it follows two young kids in the 1840s as they race across America aboard their dad's night train. And as they're on the night train, accidents and sabotage keep delaying the train. So it's up to them to solve the mystery and save their dad's train. And that's a story that we've had in development for over a year at this point. It's 22 episodes. And so we're trying to create these stories that are epic, adventurous, imaginative, and also deepen Catholics' faith, deepen family culture, and try to give things that are good and beautiful and true to our listeners. And on top of that, we have a few other shows planned, but On the Night Train is sort of our biggest project for 2022 so far. We have some other plans I can't announce yet, but there are lots of good things to come.
I'm always in for a good mystery, so I'm really looking forward to this. If you'd like to sign up, stay in tune with the Merry Beggars, head over to relevantradio.com. I'm also posting links on social media as well, so that you can sign up if you've not already heard them. It's not too late. An episode a day is being released of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. That's Peter Atkinson, the director of the Merry Beggars, here on Relevant Radio. I'll be right back, and we'll continue to walk through the theme this week for our second Advent candle. That is peace, and I'll talk about a Jesse tree. What the heck is it? How do you bring this tradition of decoration into your home and teach it to your kids, or let's be real, ourselves as well when it comes to the Bible as Catholics? I'll be right back here on Trending with Timmerie. Be sure to follow on social media and ask your question at Timmerie, that's Timmerie, and subscribe to the podcast. Catholic Order of Foresters is proud to sponsor the Relevant Radio studio line. For information about employment opportunities and flexible premium life insurance plans, visit relevantradio.com/Forester.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
Have you heard the news? There's been a lot of debate, especially over the last 8 months or so, even the last few years, regarding a draft for women. Well, the good news is this: the draft for women has been scrapped, allegedly, as the military is working on their final funding bill, and that is going to be pulled out, according to many reports. I think this is fantastic news, and I've discussed a lot about the draft in past episodes, one of which we'll link now on social media, as well as in the show notes for today's podcast, relevantradio.com/trending. And there are a lot of problems surrounding a draft for women that we could unpack. I hope you listen to that episode. But it also addresses the whole idea of women in combat to begin with. But I think that just touching on the good news, I think that the fact that this was taken out of the current spending bill for the funding bill for the military is very important. It shows that the American people and our American legislators still see the value and the responsibility of men to protect women and children, to be there as protectors, to preserve the future, and to cherish the great offering, differences, and beauty of femininity. And you see, we see this as the value that is being held in women. And yes, their potential to be mothers, who are already mothers, and their capacity to nurture and care for future generations. But I think that we miss the mark if we reduce it just to motherhood or make it not about motherhood at all, this value. I think that we have to understand that what was just upheld in our legislature, even in 2021, as we see this de-Christianization, this increase in secularism, this increase in this attitude that in order to have equality, women must not only be able to do what men do, but do it better and have more resources to be able to do it better. Talk about lack of fairness, but that's what people push for today. And so I think what's being said and communicated by a draft for women being scrapped from the spending bill for funding the military is significant. That women still matter. That men and women are different. There's something to be protected, cherished, and preserved. And I think this is fantastic news, and we need to stop buying the argument that if you want equal rights, you have to have a draft. Because the reality is, I think a lot of women who want so-called equal rights do not want a draft. And that's the funny part about this whole conversation. But again, I'm linking a past show where I talked about women in combat here on Trending. You can check it out now on social media at Timmerie, Timmerie. It'll also be available in the podcast notes as well. You can subscribe on the Relevant Radio app or wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. Okay, so we're in this second week of Advent, and as I've shared before, we've been talking about peace this week, because peace is what that second candle on our Advent wreath that we see in the church or we see within our homes growing up represents. The first was hope, so all week we talked about hope, and now this week is peace. And I talked yesterday about peace and this, how it's a sense of belonging. It's an understanding of a home, not just the home and comfort of being at home, drinking hot cocoa, sitting by a fire. You know, that's my one really sad thing. I moved to the Midwest and I have no fireplace. I mean, what are we doing here? We need to work on this. Anyways, I digress. But you know, we think about all of these things that provide comfort, and sometimes we mistake the idea of peace with that. Or we mistake the idea of peace as always focusing on the idea of promoting world peace. But as I discussed and broke down yesterday, peace is one of the 12 fruits of the Holy Spirit. It's a sense of belonging, and ultimately a sense of belonging before God. And as I unpack this, I start to think about how, and I mentioned this yesterday, one of the fundamental elements of discovering the sense of belonging as people of faith is that we understand that we belong to not just our families, that we belong to God, that we belong to the church. And I think that one of the ways best understood in living this out is by going to daily mass, participating in the liturgy of the church, the saints. There's this place of belonging. I think another way to ponder this is by pondering salvation history. When we look at salvation history of all of the characters, male and female, the births, the children, the infidelity, the sinners, the saints, the preparation and prophecies for Christ's coming, the reality and at times bleakness of human nature, but then the vision of God and the vision God has for humanity. We see this dispersed all throughout salvation history, but we miss it if we're not reading sacred scripture. When we read sacred scripture, that sense of peace, that fruit of the Holy Spirit, that virtue can truly be lived out when we're reading the inspired word of God. As I said before, is filled with sinners, saints, and so much more of our story. And one really neat way to celebrate, ponder, prepare for Christ, and also do a little bit of digging in terms of salvation history within our homes, whether you have children, whether you don't have children. Everyone loves to decorate for Christmas, right? Well, one of the ways we can do this is actually with the Jesse tree. I don't know if you've ever heard of this. And in my opinion, I've never really been one to actually adopt the Jesse tree because I always kind of thought that it just didn't look very nice. A lot of people will print little Jesse tree ornaments, cut them out and hang these little paper ornaments on their tree. If you do that, great. I love it. I'm just being snobby when it comes to my Christmas decorations. That's all. You can even buy sets of Jesse tree ornaments and have a separate tree. But what I've wanted to do this year is start to buy ornaments that match what the Jesse tree is. The idea is it can be practiced like an advent calendar, or it can be part of what your actual tree is, or a separate tree itself, the Jesse tree. And what it is that you're taking the ornaments, and those ornaments each represent a part of salvation history. It's an opportunity to teach, study, or ponder sacred scripture and the characters and events that occurred all throughout salvation history. Part of the theme for this comes from Isaiah chapter 11, where we read Isaiah talk about a shoot that shall sprout from the stump of Jesse, and from his roots a bud shall blossom. This prophecy of the coming of the Christ child from the line of Jesse, who is the father of David. Now, these ornaments can really, I think, they appeal to the opportunity for creativity within our home. You can do anything from printing a free ornament cutout online and cut out the ornaments with various things representing each day or various events in salvation history. You can buy kits online, make them yourself. Or what I've been working on this year, because let me tell you, I do not have a lot of Christmas ornaments. Still acquiring those as a new couple. I borrowed a bunch from my parents last year, and unfortunately they didn't make it cross country with me this year. And so as I've been pondering what I wanted to put on my tree, I've been trying to do a bridge version of the Jesse tree. And so things that you could do, for example, are an ark or a boat that represents for example, the ark that we saw Noah traveling during the time of the great floods, the deluge, that saved him and his family and the animals. You could even do a globe for the creation story. You could do an apple and maybe even a snake with it for the account of the fall of Adam and Eve. You could do a tree about the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the tree of life. You could do a little tent for the call of Abraham, or a rainbow for the flood. Some people have done a slingshot for David. So some of the things that I'm working on building up my tree, because by the way, we decided to wait to decorate until closer to Christmas. One, we'll be traveling, and I just couldn't have my tree die. I needed a living tree still. But two, I decided this year I wanted to we always keep our tree up all the way till the presentation, which is all the way till February 2nd, our wedding anniversary. It's a long time, and you need to have your tree living, or at least not becoming a fire hazard. I guess that doesn't matter as much now that we're not in California. But a couple of things I've done, I bought this really beautiful glass handmade blown whale for Jonah and the whale. I bought this really beautiful, tasteful wooden ornament of a lion and a lamb, prophecy from Isaiah as well. You can get angels, baby Jesus, an apple, beautiful ornaments that tell the story. Read the scriptures. Teach it to yourself, teach it to your family, and allow salvation to come to life in salvation history on your Christmas tree this year. Wednesday, it's the Feast of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. I'll discuss the value of the human person in a dehumanizing age and what Our Lady teaches us. I'll also discuss revaluing virginity to our kids, as well as St. Louis de Montfort, who loved Our Lady, and I'll discuss his method for saying the rosary that may help you if you're struggling to meditate on the mysteries. Join me daily on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app at 6 p.m. Central.